Thank you, Professor Lee. Nobel Laureate, Professor Roger Myerson, and also Dean Zhang, and Chair Barbara Tang, and also the board member of this conference, and distinguished guests, student. Good morning. Yeah. On behalf of National Taiwan University, I would like to welcome you to join the conference of research and policy conference on empirical studies of conflicts. I just heard this is the first time such conference to be held in Asia, and we are very proud it is in NTU. Thank you very much. And also, I heard this conference is to gather the scholars not only in the political science and also in economics science and social science to discuss the issue of conflicts. And this issue is particularly important in today's world because we have a very tight competition and the geopolitics. Those kind of issues affect the whole world, and that shows the importance of this conference. And today we have the privilege to have Professor Myerson to be the keynote speaker for this conference. I think everybody knows he is the Nobel Laureate. In 2007, he won this award in the economic science to recognize his remarkable contribution in game theories and also an analysis of conflicts and the kind of probability models to analyze the economics decisions. And those are very important issues for the world. And not only that, he's not only the leader for academics, he's also the leader in administration. In particular, he's a president of Game Theory Society and also the president of Economic Societies. His outstanding contribution has won numerous awards. Not only to be elected to be a member of the National Academy of Arts and Science and the National Academy of Science, and also won a Nobel Prize and a lot of honorary doctorate degrees. Besides that, I have to say thank you, Professor Myerson, because we have a lot of students of the faculty. Because of you that give us outstanding training to our faculty. Then, we cultivate a lot of good, excellent scholar and students because of you. I just know that Professor Myerson, he's a your student. I'm a little surprised at that. Anyway, thank you very much for giving NG opportunity to join your group and give them a very good training. And probably you don't know that Professor Lee, he just won the Outstanding Research Award from National Science Council and Technology. Well, we have a very high expectation on him. Anyway, I think that your speech today is very important, in particular, as you know, now the situation of Taiwan, we have a very complicated environment because we have a different political party and we have a pressure from geopolitics and also that we face many difficult situations on the government structures. We are a small country, but we have a government structure is quite big, similar to big countries, and also that we face a different kind of challenge I think that well, your game series probably developed by you can give out some clue how to solve these complicated issues and the environment, because as I read from your notice, the theory developed by you is particularly useful in analyzing that when the party, they have different kind of information, and also they distrust each other's, from what I know. And that's currently the Taiwan face these kind of situations. So I believe that we can learn a lot from your speech today. And not only that, I believe the game series tool that you developed is also very useful for the current world, in particular in Asia, because in Asia, as you may know, we have many complicated issues, and the countries always have different. They have many different cultures. It's very complicated, and now everyone is fighting for their interest, and in this case, I believe the theory by you is very important for us and also for the world, not only for Taiwan or Asia, and for the world too. So it's my great pleasure and honor to welcome you here, and please join me to give the warmest welcome to Professor Myerson. Thank you.
Good, thank you. It's a great privilege to be here at National Taiwan University. Yes, I've known for decades that we can get great students from you, though we have to compete with Princeton and UCSD and Stanford for them, of course. And that we're lucky if some of our students come back here, but it's great to be here at Taiwan. I am particularly, of course, very, very glad to be at ESOC. Thank you for the invitation. E in ESOC stands for empirical, and I am not an empiricist, and I'm just going to talk a light theory for 35 minutes. So it's a stretch, but thank you for stretching to bring me here, and I'm really, really glad to be in. And the conversation, I'm glad to be speaking early so that the empiricists, in fact, we heard yesterday from Jacob that some nice data that seems to suggest the theory I'm about to articulate is wrong. On the other hand, when he kindly got into the details, when you parse the data in different ways, there's still hope for the theory that local politics is important. So what do I want to say? In this Special Inspector General's report at the fall of the U.S.-supported government after 20 years of struggle in Afghanistan in 2021, in his report he noted that a refusal of the U.S. government to prepare for future stabilization missions after the disastrous failure of the intervention in South Vietnam did not prevent wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, but did ensure that they became quagmires. I should note that, let me just say before I go any further, that my thesis will be that democratic state building missions fail when local politics is ignored. That's the basic thesis. This talk I had the privilege of presenting a little less than 2 months ago at West Point to the faculty, and treating them to please consider training their students with some kind of approaches that I hoped would include this one, to thinking about democratic state building missions. Much more recently at West Point, the President of the United States came and spoke quite forcefully that everybody should forget about nation building, that's just a bad thing to do. My point is that, and talked as if those of us who speak about it as something to think about are people who are advocating nation building. I'm not advocating anybody intervening in anybody else's country to, quote, bring democracy, but interventions will happen, and when they do, let me just say, everything that is done in conflict by our great national militaries is stuff that we would like to not do. Bombing is also something that one would hope to never do because it's just bad, but actually everybody agrees that powerful nations have to be ready to know how to do aerial bombardment, for example, and I'm arguing that great nations may need to know something about a capability for post-conflict political reconstruction, and in particular, There's no shame in trying to figure out how to do post-conflict political reconstruction in a way that respects the wishes of the population. There is a great precedent throughout history of very effective post-conflict political reconstruction that imposes a rule with repression and violence, if necessary, that's suitable to the conquerors and regardless of the wishes of the people. But it's not a bad thing in the world if we try to pivot towards international relations where wars are ended with an attempt to reconstruct the defeated country in a way that actually provides them with a government that's accountable to its people. And the question is, how do you do it? And the remarkable thing is that the United States, professing such goals in several conflicts during my lifetime, South Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, was so singularly unsuccessful, total failures in 2 out of 3, one could argue, and mixed. And certainly lots of frustration and costly failures, even if the outcome is more ambiguous in Iraq, where the government that the United States set up is continuing to exist, a political system is continuing. What can go wrong? Let me just also argue that a country that simply plans to respond to international provocations by attacking people there and not worrying about who takes over thereafter is a country that can actually become a lightning rod for international terrorism, as extremists who would like to take over their country but aren't very popular there might think that if they can just provoke a U.S. response, for example, that they could then create enough social havoc that they could then have a chance to become the leaders of their country thereafter. And that's not stupid. That's something that, for example, we've seen as a strategy with ISIS and such groups. Anyway. So the most success, a capacity to credibly threaten not only to have bombing operations that will be destructive and effective, but also in their destruction, but also to do post-conflict political reconstruction is a very good way of threatening unpopular extremists. That if they mess with the United States, for example, our great power, whichever country it is, that they may suffer. About how to do it, because the United States, in particular, my country, has obviously failed. So let me start with what a straw man to attack: the optimistic, centralized theory of democratic state building, which I think describes how I might have thought about things decades ago, before the United States gave me some empirical data to disabuse me of this. That it's very easy that after you've conquered, after a great power has established political dominance, I should say, certainly the United States my country has a tradition. Say in Nicaragua, the Somozas were put in power not because they were popular in their country, but because they were convenient to the leadership of the United States. And this is but if you want to go in and say, surely theoretically you should get less resistance. A great power invader should get less resistance if it says, once we conquer this place, we're not going to annex it to our own country. We're not going to start exploiting you. We're going to allow you to have popularly accountable government. We just want to make sure that those crazy extremists don't control you. That should be an easy sell. It hasn't been. So let's see. The centralized theory of democratic state building has assumed that after establishing basic security, a conquering power could simply hold elections to ratify a new constitution, to elect a new national leader into that constitution, and then help build effective government agencies and security forces under the elected leadership that they've just provided. You've got leaders who evidently have a good popular base. What can go wrong? What can go wrong? In a failed state, the basic problem with that thesis empirically, I think, has been that in a failed state, there might not be anyone whom people throughout the country would trust to wield national power responsibly. We might have lots of subdivisions, and somebody's got to win the election, but that doesn't mean that he's not widely distrusted, and even if members of his or her ethnic group or whatever, or local provincial subdivision is widely trusted, but is trusted there, but not elsewhere. So we have to be concerned. We have to win people's trust across the nation for a new government, but the first thing to recognize is that even a failed state is not a blank slate, and in some sense, the Hobbesian image of a war of everyone against everyone else is just false, and that's the point. Where people cannot rely on a national government for protection and rule of law, they must get their basic protection and other essential public services that everybody needs from local groups under local leadership, which may be more or less trusted, whether they're local bandits or local warlords or clan leaders or tribal leaders or respected local religious leaders. Local forms of local leadership are providing security, we should assume, everywhere. Nowhere does the Hobbesian anarchy of everyone against everyone else prevail, because humans simply cannot live that way, obviously. And our species evolved to live in communities. We're social apes. We live together, and we have forms of local leadership, but forms of national structures are needed to prevent intercommunal violence, for sure. But we should recognize wherever one goes, there's going to be some forms of trusted local leadership, whether they are integrated into the national state or hidden from it. It depends on the quality of that state. Many people may trust their familiar local leaders more than the national leaders who the interveners might choose to impose, and that should be our prior in understanding the political reconstruction problem. Interveners then, who would respect the wishes of, quote, the people, should expect that should expect to face vital questions about the distribution of power between the new national leadership that is to be constructed to provide regional order and local authorities. Such concerns were absolutely vital in American politics between 1776 and 1787, when George Washington and his friends got together to write the U.S. Constitution with a few amendments we still have. There was a vital concern that a national order should not suppress the existing provincial and local orders that were familiar to the American colonists. And it's remarkable that the United States in its own international state building has not recognized that. I should say, I will try to use the word "the people" in the way it was used by the founders of the United States. And in the English language of their time, the people referred to the enfranchised residents acting together in their local communities. That really is what the people meant, and the Afghan shuras were very much an expression of the people as well. If we the people in Afghanistan would have referred to a political order working up from the communal shuras. But I want to argue not just that, obviously, where there's a failed state, people who must get protection. They're going to get more protection. They're going to look to protection from local leadership, local organization. That should be the prior axiom when thinking about state building. But even successful states depend on a balance of local and national politics. Locally accountable leaders maybe have better incentives to provide the kind of public service that their community wants and needs, because centrally appointed officials may care more about national politics and national political interests that are essential to their future promotion. It's local accountability that provides the right incentives for local public good provision. I would argue, and this is very important, it's one line there, that local leaders with a stake in the system can mobilize residents to defend the state. This is a vital empirical question. I don't know. Edward Lansdale in classic experiences in Philippines and South Vietnam in the 1950s would talk about the X factor. What is it that gives people incentive to support the political system of their state? Stathis Kalivas' work I find empirically convincing and yet disappointing, because what I read is whoever has control of a community is more likely to be able to get people in that community to work for them and support them. That doesn't answer. We want something that is prior to that. So let me suggest. I would like to suggest a principle that so we start with the axiom that people live in local communities and neighborhoods in large cities, villages in the countryside. People live in communities where they have respected local leaders. If their respected local leaders of their communities have no status in a larger political system, then why would you think that your working for the state would help you to get and become a leader of your community, a respected? And it goes two ways. The other way is if the leaders of my community, people who are authoritative leaders in the community where I live, have a stake in the state, they have a position in the larger political system, then they can provide communal incentives. I will know that they can credibly promise me that they will remember if I volunteer, risk my life in defending our state, that they can provide rewards and incentives metered out appropriately because they live in the same community with me. And secondly, I might hope to become a leader of the community myself as a result of volunteering conspicuously to serve the broader political service. But that's not going to be realistic if that hasn't already happened. If local leaders in my community are not already integrated into the political system, why should I think that my service to the broader state will get me to be an important person at home when I come home after risking my life in the struggle? So to me, that is an absolutely vital, important, and I will get back to that this afternoon also more when I talk about Afghanistan, about Ukraine. Good local leaders, I've argued in several papers that autonomous responsible local government provides opportunities for people, for leaderships to prove its ability to serve the public better and thereby make national politics more competitive. That's an important reason why democracies, I think, tend to thrive better when they have not just democratic politics at the national level, but also democratic politics at the local level. I believe that Taiwan is an example of a country where democratic politics at the local level actually predated the development of a multi-party competition at the national level. And that, to me, is a healthy system. That's true in Brazil, for example, in the 20th century recovery after the last military takeover. It was true in Somaliland, but not in Somalia. Anyway, but I would argue that the fact that local politics, autonomous, responsible local government, helps to enrich democratic politics at the national level by providing an opportunity for people who do not yet have national power to show that maybe they can serve the public better. That opportunity is one of several fundamental reasons why national leaders might prefer not to have autonomous local politics. They'd prefer to centralize, to keep power around themselves, and the idea of having autonomous local politics be independent of them is a threat. So to me, the decentralized theory of democratic state building that obviously I'm advocating against the straw man I put up on the previous slide is that national political reconstruction must begin from a recognition of the society where political reconstruction is happening is one, or where the interveners are hoping for it to happen, is one where there are local groups that have won the faith of people in their communities, or at least the respect of people of their communities, and the need to reassure people that the new government is not going to suppress forms of local leadership that people already rely on. Is an important question that has to be faced in national political reconstruction and building a new political compact. But that empowering locally accountable leaders, even if it's inconvenient to those people at the very top of the state, makes the state stronger and more accountable. That's the second proposition. That in fact, I argue in a variety of ways that the failure of the Afghan project that the United States was supporting for 20 years to ever formally integrate, ever give a credible role to the village authorities that everybody in almost every part of Afghanistan knew about and understood and respected. The failure to integrate them credibly into the state political system meant that the state we were setting up was going to be weaker and could be overturned, and might not have been if power had been shared in that way. So the point is that negotiations about sharing power between local groups and new national leadership are essential for democratic state building. That's the proposition. Foreign aid that focuses only on building up a state at the center would implicitly and maybe even explicitly threaten local institutions that people have learned to trust. That's just a basic proposition, for a basic starting point. I should say, there is an argument that there is no one size. What do they say? They always say there's no one size fits all approach to nation building. Every nation is different. Of course, that's true. Of course, my country's traditions and your country's traditions have lots of different color, and an economic theorist wants to say all human beings have some things in common, and that's important, so we can build social science. But let me say, if you thought that absolutely every nation is completely separate from every other experience, that you can't know anything, well, who are you going to talk to? You have to talk to residents of the country. Prominent people who really know how the country works, not just in their localities, but people who are networked at the national level and are on your side. You're not going to talk to the enemy. The enemy's going to try to mislead you. So you want people who are sympathetic to your intervention's cause. Imagine you are part of a great power intervening. So you're going to, and no one size fits all. You have to talk to people, you have to ask people, but who do you trust? You talk to people who are advocating your intervention and who are important people networked nationally. Who understand the beginnings of the difficulties of building a national coalition, because they've been part of groups that functioned nationally. They're not just ordinary people. Okay, whoever those people are, you can count on those people. Think that after this nation building thing is done, they are either going to be the president of the country, or at least they're going to be on the team related to the president of the country. So they have an incentive to tell you, don't trust those other guys, concentrate all power in the president of the country. And that's exactly the wrong advice. We need, the theory that I was giving is an antidote to that theory, and it's not a one size fits all. It's saying start from an assumption that there's local politics and that they're concerned about any national leader being somebody who would suppress the trusted forms of local leadership. So that's the beginning. That means that state builders need to be talking regularly to local leaders throughout the country, not just the potential national leaders. There's a need for and take the word from Rufus Phillips III, who I'll say a little bit more of later, local stabilization officers who monitor and respond to local political conditions. That's my central thesis, is that a team of local stabilization officers, and I hope to say something about how that compares to PRTs in recent American interventions, which I think were not organized as a team. There was no national team of political coordinators, of provincial reconstruction teams. When the goal is state building, I'm saying foreign assistance should be used to encourage local leaders to support the development of the new national political compact. That is the problem. The people in this country want to be a country together. They need the old principles have just been overthrown for whatever reason, perhaps because they were severely problematic to people in the country, perhaps because they were internationally problematic to powerful nations like the intervener, but a new national compact is needed. So local stabilization officers need authority to direct local aid, to reward local groups who act cooperatively with a new political system, but they need to be also carrying messages back and forth to the center about what the local leadership needs. They're encouraging the local leaders to cooperate, but they're also carrying the messages about what are local concerns that national political agreements need to respect. That's the role of the local stabilization officers. But this local political conditionality is difficult for outsiders to observe. Remember, when we're talking about an intervention for democratic state building, for trying to build a new state that respects and responds to the desires of its people, that's a mission where we're trying to build a new state that's accountable to its people, not to the Congress and people of the United States of America, for example, if it's an American intervention. Therefore, state builders may need exemptions from the normal controls of say, the U.S. federal government if it's a U.S.-sponsored intervention. There are reasons for these are reasons for thinking that stabilization officers should be a profession. They need to be professionals who have norms that they reinforce each other's goals in serving the intervening country, not like the normal officer of any country to serve his own country. So let me go for it because the time is short. Let me give you one controversial historical precedent. People have said, well, give us an example of a success. Well, I'll get to Taiwan in the second example, but the first example is the biggest one in the world, and it's sort of everybody could see it. You just look at a map of the world in 1920 and all the pink parts. That was, that was the British Empire. How did they get that? When the British Empire had the most successful operation for foreign political stabilization operations, let me just call it, this is imperialism, this is not democratic state building, although they sometimes talked as if the goal was partly at least to serve the people that they were conquering. But it's not, imperialism is different from democratic state building, of course, but it is a stabilization operation, and the British were pretty damn good at it in the olden days, back in the 19th century and the early 20th century, and the fact is they used a decentralized approach. The colonial district, what I want to report, by the way, I spent about 3 months reading Frederick Lugard's 1922 treatise on how to do imperial colonization in Africa, and I had to take a shower after finishing it. It was real, if you get in bed with an imperialist, you might. So I'm ready for criticism, but around page 300 and something, I found he said it all comes to 3 words. But let me tell, before I give you the 3 words, the most important 2 words are district officer. We were talking this morning about the IAS in India is the district officers incarnate. Still in India is still ruled this way. But colonial district officers were the backbone of the whole state building operation. They were, in the terms that I'm borrowing from Rufus Phillips's posthumous book, local stabilization officers. They were people whose job was to negotiate a stable coalition for political order in their locality. They were delegated large amounts of powers. Let's just say colonial imperialism is not democratic state building, but sensitivity to local political concerns can help to stabilize any political regime. That's just a basic fact, and that's why I'm going to cite these guys. The 3 principles of Lord Lugard's 1922 dual mandate in British tropical Africa. And by the way, that title, there's one page somewhere in the middle where he explains the title. The dual mandate is one to serve the people of Africa whom we're conquering, and the other is to serve international economic interests that are going to exploit the resources of these countries. So you can have it both ways. Anyway, that's okay. Anyway, his principles were 1, decentralization, 2, cooperation, 3, continuity. Decentralization means he's decentralizing the power of his operation, which would, for an imperial intervention, was much greater power than perhaps a non-military economic intervention for political stabilization. Without, you can have intervention which is only economic, with assistance to try to cultivate a new regime. You could have a military intervention that's committed to withdrawing within a certain period of time, or you could have an imperial. But his decentralization meant the power of the British Empire in the colonies, in these colonies in Africa, that's where he's talking about. He operated first in Malawi, then in Uganda, and finally Nigeria, where the name of Nigeria is due to him and his wife. They gave the country its name. Decentralization of power means that the power of the British Empire in Africa was largely delegated to these district officers. And these districts, by the way, often had, if you just do the math, you find the average population was about 50,000 people per district. 20 district officers per million population is a rough quantitative number. Of course, it varied. But the power of the British Empire within its district is largely delegated to one person, the local district officer, and he is charged cooperation. He is charged with using that power to try to form inclusive coalitions for local political order, for local government. That is their mission. That is their goal. And continuity. These district officers worked for, I think, typically 18 months in one district, then they were cycled home, then they'd go to a new district in the same general area. So there's a problem of continuity, and the solution for continuity was that the district officers are closely supervised by a I'll call provincial coordinator. The resident was another term. The provincial coordinator, we'll call it for standard vocabulary, who supervised a province that typically had just three or four districts. So they were. Any decision that a district officer was trying to enforce in his district had to be recorded and cleared with the supervising provincial coordinator. The provincial coordinators were more long-term. I should point out that in a remote district, who can monitor them? The district officers and their provincial coordinators together form a team for monitoring and responding to local political issues. If there's any violence in the district, any unrest in a district, the district officer is going to be asked, why didn't you find out about that when you were touring around the district, talking to villagers throughout your district? You should have known and been responding to it. And so they had an incredibly sophisticated mechanism for monitoring and, in a decentralized way, responding to the local political problems. But who monitors the monitor? Obviously, in a remote district, there's plenty of potential for abuse, and one of the answers is the provincial coordinator, but he's only coming in occasionally into the district. The other answer is the cycling, that a successor who shares the group norms of how district officers should behave comes in, and if he discovers that his predecessor, he's going to find out pretty quickly if his predecessor has been abusing powers to take advantage of and exploit the local population in ways that are creating unrest and immiserating the population in ways that are adverse to the stabilization interests of the empire, of the broader political regime. So the cycling itself is a way of solving agency problems. But they had a flat three-level hierarchy at the national level, the provincial coordinators and the district officers who are exercising very great powers within the system that communication of local issues to top policymakers, and that's the basic principle. They were an executive team. But I should note, colonial district officers under Lord Lugard and thereafter, they generally tended to promote a despotic power of one local chief, where the principle of cooperation, the nice principle of cooperation as Lord Lugard articulated, should have meant promoting a broadly inclusive local council. That would have been a much truer implementation of Lord Lugard's principle of continuity, of cooperation, of empowering a broadly inclusive local council that includes representatives of different parts of the local communities in the district, and that is completely consistent with democratic state building. Let me give one other example, and there's an important name at the top. Rufus Phillips. Rufus Phillips was, when I was a baby, he was volunteering to join the then new Central Intelligence Agency of the United States, and he was sent in 1954 to, when I was 3 years old, to join Edward Lansdale in trying to prop up the new country of South Vietnam following the French withdrawal from Indochina. He died in December of 1921, and my reference here to his book on why Vietnam matters is excellent. I recommend it highly, and his posthumous book, Stabilizing Fragile States, a guy who saw the American failure in South Vietnam, and in 2010 was in Afghanistan volunteering for Afghan NGOs to try to promote democracy. He saw the whole failure in three times in Iraq, Afghanistan, and after seeing in South Vietnam. That's well worth reading. In 1962, with Bert Fraley, he set up something called the Office of Rural Affairs, which was then destroyed in 1964. So it functioned for 2 years, but it's my ideal of how a state building mission should have been attempted, say, by the United States, and it had great promise. And its failure is also worth noting. It's important in National Taiwan University to talk about Bert Fraley. In the 1950s, he was here in Taiwan. And if anyone knows anything about what he was doing, it seems Phillips says that as they were setting up this Office of Rural Affairs, things that Fraley had seen in Taiwan helped him to understand how to do it. The fact that there was some forms of local political institutions that had some role in Taiwan from previous history might be important. I don't know. So please tell me it later in the conference. Write me. Let me know if you know anything that has anything about what Bert Fraley was doing on this island in the 1950s before he went to work in Laos and South Vietnam after 1961 with Rufus Phillips. So basically what was going on in this Office of Rural Affairs, they had one kid, what's his name? Richard Holbrook. It was his first job out, and was to go run with, what was I've forgotten what, I think the office, they had like some tens of thousands, maybe it was $100,000 a year to spend in each province. So these kids fresh out of college were sent out with money to decentralization. The direction of assistance funds was decentralized to the local stabilization officers. The term that they used was provincial representatives. But to avoid confusion with the previous example, I'll just say local stabilization officers. They would work with local Vietnamese officials who were, the local governor was typically a military guy, but he was a centrally appointed person. But they would work with the local Vietnamese officials who were nationally appointed, and also work with village councils that they were trying to set up in the villages throughout the province, offering them money for projects to encourage, in Lord Lugard's terms, cooperation among provincial officials and locally elected village leaders to build an inclusive coalition for local governance. This is the establishment of the local foundations of the state, the local political foundations of the state. I think there are about 40-something provinces in South Vietnam. And when the goal is to promote political development, assistance should be decentralized, I'm arguing, to a field officer who can use it to encourage support for the new political system. And that's exactly what they were doing. They were given a budget. It wasn't a lot of money. I think it's of the order of $100,000 a year. But that was real money for certainly then and certainly in rural South Vietnam. But the normal principles of the U.S. government generated an imperative to direct assistance through silos, through different groups that specialized in providing different kinds of aid, rather than delegating so much to there was a revulsion among many people from USAID, the early USAID then, against delegating so much to kids like then young Richard Holbrook, to give them so much authority over how U.S. money was spent in remote areas. In 1964, reorganization of rural assistance curtailed its development. Let me just say, in September of 1963, Rufus Phillips did speak to President Kennedy in the White House. He was not called back by the National Security Council so at that time, the U.S. had, in the early 1960s, the U.S. had advisors working with the South Vietnamese military, and those people were sending reports back to the Secretary of Defense. I don't know what CIA agents were doing, obviously, but and then they had this Office of Rural Affairs that had a guy talking to village council leaders in every part of South Vietnam. We understand, everybody understands, that using military force against the Viet Cong guerrilla insurgency involved dropping bombs, shooting guns, and to some extent that's killing people who are guerrillas who might have been threatening the local villagers and therefore might be good to help build political strength. Or maybe your collateral damage is pissing off the local population and turning it against our government. How do you know? I don't know. I'm a professor at Chicago. I can't tell. But if you're there talking to village leaders, then you have some sense of it. What Phillips tells us in his book, his 2008 book, Why Remembering Vietnam Matters, written in the age of an intervention in Iraq and Afghanistan, he says, because he had a civilian, his network, because it was civilian, was viewed as unqualified to speak on military matters. No, they had the best information. The National Security Council should have been calling back. Rufus Phillips happens to have grown up in Virginia. In 1963, his father was dying of cancer, so he asked for leave to come back to the United States. He came back to the United States while he was in Northern Virginia. He stopped by Washington, D.C., where he was told, yeah, we'll come to some meetings, but don't say a word unless anybody calls on you. You're just the director of a program in South Vietnam. Fortunately, President Kennedy did ask him to tell, and he said, Rufus Phillips then said that Secretary of Defense McNamara was wrong, that the military intervention was the wrong way to go, the political solution was needed, he was heard that day, but in the long run, there was not doctrine saying that when you have a political network, a network that has political information from every province, that should be guiding your major policy decisions. That doctrine was missing. That's the doctrine that I'm ultimately arguing for. That the team, the decentralized team that has decentralized political engagement throughout the recipient country needs to be consulted on the national policy making decisions, and the head of it needs to have enough status that is showing up at the National Security Council meetings, for example, in the United States government, and saying what he thinks needs to be a normal foregone conclusion. Let me end with my attempt to give in one italicized sentence, fairly long sentence, what I think is the principle. In any mission to promote foreign political development, the first priority should be to send in local stabilization officers who can encourage, who are given the resources to encourage local cooperation of local leaders. And then, so that on one hand, these look like provincial reconstruction teams, but also all major decisions about mission goals and strategies should rely on guidance from the team's coordinators. As one final application, let me just suggest, think about May 2003, when Paul Bremer, the US Viceroy in Baghdad, was making a number of fateful decisions on de-Baathification, on dissolution of the Iraqi army. What this suggests, first of all, in the 2003 invasion of Iraq, it took about 6 months for them to get the provincial coordinators in all 18 provinces of Iraq. It was November of 2003 before they were all in place and started having regular meetings. But under my ideal, the invasion, which was obviously meticulously planned on the military side, but wasn't planned. The reason they got excellent people to come in, but the people who they brought in had other jobs, and it took months for them to disengage them from whatever else they were doing and get them to come to Iraq. They should have gone in with the occupation forces as they arrived. And when major questions came, major policy decisions like the dissolution of the Iraqi army, I've seen Paul Bremer say in recent years, who knows how that, you can't question my decision because you don't have the information that was available at that time. Now, with history, we can look back at it. No, the doctrine should have been, the National Security Council should have said, this is a very interesting proposal you have. What do your provincial political coordinators think about it? They should have been consulted on the decision, and that's top policymakers need to be deciding that. I've got a final quote here where I say that there have been a number of lists. I'll just show you and not talk about it. I could go back to that if you want, slides. Lists of people's lessons. This is my transcription, obviously, of somewhat longer pages of principles that various very smart people who have more experience than I do, saying what are the lessons learned from the failed state building missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. And my argument is most of those involve, look at the words like, look at Fragenberry, that avoid overreach, set realistic and attainable goals. Well, how do you, a professor at the University of Chicago can't tell you what's a realistic goal, obviously in a country I've never visited. But what I can tell you, who would know, if you send people out there and they spend a month talking to folks in the villages, trying with some money to try to get the attention of local leaders, and they're going to have a good sense of what local leaders are willing to do and what they're not willing to do, and what, with a certain amount of incentive, we could bend them to doing. So they have to be there, and many of these principles could be determined by. Would be immediately obvious once you have the team who have with decentralized political engagement throughout the country. On the other hand, the one principle, and what do I want to say, and then stop, and that is the number 7 on Keith Mine's list. Nation building is a long game, and interveners must pace themselves. Don't make a commitment to spend more money than the intervener is willing to do for decades, right? That's okay. That's not the job of the local stabilization officers. That's the job of the political leaders of the interveners, of the intervening countries. They have to decide how much is it worth our country's security and international security, international stability to help support the construction of a new and better political regime in country X. Okay, that decision is made by the top leadership. Everything else on the list basically are principles that have to be evaluated and probably would be obvious to the local stabilization team with decentralized political engagement. Thank you. Thank you for the privilege of talking to you.
Thank you so much. This is really fascinating and great to think about in sort of the context that we're dealing with today. Two questions. First, I think there's a lot of questions about why central governments in domestic state building will give up their control over resources. And Francisco Garfias and Emily Sellers have a really nice new book manuscript about this, suggesting that when they need to tax more, they might be willing to delegate to local actors. Yep. So I wonder sort of in the international system, like what is it that we sort of see, like why is it that we might expect either local or international actors to actually give up some of their power to these stabilization assistance teams? And then second, related, I think probably the big question is sort of what are interveners seeking to do? Yeah. And a lot of these interventions come from either establishing empire or perhaps overthrowing a regime and setting up a new one in the modern era, but that's a relatively small set of state building interventions, right? So I think especially with a lot of like emphasis on consent, would this still apply? And maybe especially as we have like China entering the game here in the Pacific, for example, on policing missions, maybe this is the best practice if they're trying to stabilize, but if they're just trying to win influence, is it better to just give the military or the police sort of what they want in these contexts?
Right. So, for example, the question
is it an international intervention to try to rebuild Somalia? Is it better to delegate to the Ethiopians and the Kenyans, who, after all, know the region better? But gee, do they have interests, and their interests are maybe adverse to the building of a state that serves the Somali people? And maybe the more distant. Let me say, on the second question, of course we should be if you pick your favorite example of a nasty invasion of a country for the purposes of conquest in recent or whatever time, within the last 100 or 200 years, I think you'll find that the conqueror went in saying nice things. So let me just say one of the other points about this agenda is to try, if we can't figure out if we could figure out what are the principles of a successful democratic state building intervention, then people who profess that we're going in to help the people of the country, you could say, but you're not doing the stuff that you're supposed to do. The reason that doesn't work is that nobody agrees on what it is you're supposed to do. And that's another danger of the no one-size-fits-all approach to state building, is that now we've got no way to have a serious international debate that might constrain a great power that's using honeyed words to conceal a desire to conquest for exploitation. We got them to elect somebody who then said that they would sell us all these resources at nice low prices. Look, this is great. And look, he won an election. Yeah, but I think the other side of the question, why do people? You're absolutely right that leaders have. The truth is, King Edward I of England had totally succeeded in the suppression of Simon de Montfort's rebellion against his father, and yet he continued calling Parliament, partly because he did discover that bringing in the elected, somewhat freely elected representatives of the provincial gentries to a common Parliament actually enabled him to more effectively tax the people of England. They were more willing to cooperate. So it did make the state stronger. So there are reasons why monarchs might accept some local political constraints on their power, and it's happened. It usually doesn't happen. They don't like it. I think it's important. Let me make an empirical statement without evidence. and that is I believe that in most cases, foreign assistance is a force for centralization. And it happened, and my plea is if we just think about that a balance, that when we help a foreign country in any way, we're providing resources, we help by rich countries help a poor country that they just, even for benevolent reasons, that they sympathize with by providing resources. How can resources hurt? Well, one way they can hurt is you go in respecting the national law. Now that means your provision of resources is subject to regulation by the recognized national leaders. Now you're providing them with resources that they can use for their own political purposes by diverting them, by giving them to people who support them and diverting them away from people who are their opposition. And therefore, they have less reason they can rely on our foreign resources and have less reason to need cooperation in raising taxes and getting, and making deals with respected local leaders. So we are a force for centralization. I'm thinking about Giustosi's book about the Taliban, which argues that there was lots of people in the Taliban who wanted a more decentralized organization, but the guys who were getting money from Pakistan and Saudi were able to centralize. So even within the Taliban, foreign assistance was a force for centralization of the political system. That's obviously a hypothesis that I see from limited reading. So that, anyway. Good.
Okay, I may wonder whether decentralization may exacerbate social deviations because some local leaders may prioritize their personal or fictional interests over public good.
I'm sorry.
I may wonder whether decentralization may exacerbate social division because some local leaders may prioritize their personal interests over public good.
So let me just say, in saying that local politics is important, I'm not suggesting that people who are successful in local politics are necessarily superior human beings to the ones who have begun to prevail in national political movements. And I think it's probably, if you and I were part of a new national political movement that was taking over in say a newly decolonizing country, the sense that those local leaders from different parts of the provinces are not God's gift to humanity, they're just some selfish people. But of course, economists start from an assumption of selfish materialism among all human beings. I know that's my intellectual prejudice of a working assumption, even though people I know are typically nicer than that. But I'm not arguing that local leaders are more nicer than national leaders. I'm arguing that this is a reality, that building trust is difficult. The United States, for example, has, for one thing, from the beginning of United States political history, we've had a Congress. Before the revolution was over, the first national institution was a Congress, and that helped to build trust across the country. And we now find a kind of polarization that's bifurcating our Congress into a Republican faction and a Democratic faction is breaking down the barriers of trust, even within the United States with its excellent political, obviously blessed with a wonderful political tradition, and we have problems with trust. So problems with trust among regions and different tribal groups. We have tribes in Chicago, by the way, very tribal politics. So I'm not denigrating that. These are realities. And The Economist begins with a sense that a competitive system is going to bring out better service for the masses from the suppliers than less competitive system. And within the terms of economic theory, I think the important idea I want to make is that the opportunity to exercise real power with local accountability, at a local level, to exercise real power at a local level with local accountability, but then also, if one does a good job, to then use that success in running for higher office, that makes national democratic politics more competitive And I believe, and I have not, maybe this is a good empirical question. It's not about conflict, but I believe that we'll find successful democracies that endure tend to have more real delegation of some share of power to local, to autonomous subnational governments, and this dichotomy begins with the French Revolution and the American Revolution in the 18th century. The American Revolution began with provinces and that ratified the Constitution only conditional on their provincial politics remaining of importance in the national political life, whereas the French government, the French regional provincial institutions in the old regime were largely were extremely aristocratic and and the revolutionaries dismantled them to create a unitary state, and the sad history of the French Revolution turning ultimately within a generation to imperial autocracy. I think has a lot to do with it's more centralized. The democracy purely at a centralized level is much less stable and much less competitive. The idea that local politics lowers entry barriers into national politics, thereby making it more competitive, is a way of saying it to economic theorists. So.
Okay, so I think we're a few minutes late.
Yes, it's lunchtime.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll stop here and let's thank again.
Thank you. Thank you.